Have you ever experienced the sensation that your identity feels like a performance you can no longer maintain, as though the persona the world recognizes is disintegrating? Yet something deep within whispers, this is necessary. What if your ego's dissolution isn't your destruction, but rather the emergence of something profoundly authentic, something your nervous system has been craving and your soul has quietly arranged? Here is what rarely gets discussed. Your ego wasn't designed for happiness. It was engineered for survival. That is precisely why ego death, despite being frightening, can feel like finally releasing a breath you've been holding your entire existence. But what genuinely occurs in your brain and consciousness following ego death? And how did Carl Jung articulate this phenomenon long before neuroscience validated it? Stay engaged, because this exploration will illuminate not only what ego death does to your neural pathways, but why it might be the exact remedy your psychological well-being requires, and why the aspect of yourself resisting this transformation is simultaneously the part yearning for it most. We inhabit a culture where ego gets casually mentioned everywhere. He is egotistical. Release your ego. But what is it actually? Psychologically, your ego represents the constructed identity you've built to navigate existence. It is the I you believe yourself to be, composed of narratives, classifications, childhood patterns, and social facades. Most of it was programmed without your awareness or consent. Carl Jung termed this the persona, the public face we present. Beneath that facade, he explained, exists the shadow, every disowned fragment of yourself sacrificed for acceptance, validation, or security. Your ego grips that mask as if it is essential for survival, because from the ego's perspective, it absolutely is. Now here is the fascinating part. According to fMRI research on meditation and psychedelics, published in prestigious journals like Nature and Frontiers in Human Neuroscience, when individuals report ego dissolution, measurable neurological changes occur. The default mode network, the DMN responsible for self-referential cognition, and your internal narrator, shows dramatically reduced activity. This identical network demonstrates hyperactivity in individuals experiencing anxiety and depression. It generates thoughts like, I'm inadequate, what if I'm rejected, or I must maintain control. When your ego begins dissolving, whether through intensive meditation, breathwork, psychedelic journeys, or spiritual crisis, it transcends philosophical transformation. It becomes a biological phenomenon. This biological unraveling feels catastrophic because your brain equates identity with safety. When the facade crumbles, your nervous system responds with alarm. It resembles death, but it isn't. It is the death of an inauthentic self, what follows ego death. After that psychological mask vanishes, does your brain permanently restructure itself? Can ego death genuinely heal trauma? And how did Carl Jung describe this rebirth decades before neuroscience possessed terminology for it? That is our next exploration. But first, if you're someone passionate about expanding consciousness and investigating life's deeper dimensions, subscribe to Fractal Wisdom so you never miss content that challenges perceived limitations. Stay through the conclusion, because later we'll reveal practical methodologies to safely navigate ego death and harness its transformative potential for healing, creativity, and spiritual evolution. You've just experienced what resembles an emotional cataclysm. Your ego, that voice perpetually needing narrative control, has fallen silent, perhaps disappeared entirely. You're uncertain whether you're liberated or unraveling. But here is the paradox neuroscience. now confirms when your ego dissolves, your brain doesn't fracture. It begins healing. What happens subsequently might explain why countless individuals report profound tranquility, clarity, and even euphoria after ego death, because beneath identity's noise exists a deeper intelligence awaiting emergence. When the default mode network quiets, whether through meditation, psychedelics, near-death experiences, or intensive breath work, something remarkable activates. Neural connectivity across brain regions increases dramatically. Imperial College London researchers called this entropic brain activities. Essentially, your brain establishes connections it ordinarily wouldn't, like orchestral instruments spontaneously improvising together for the first time. Your sense of self becomes more fluid, more expansive. You begin recognizing perhaps you're not merely your thoughts, but the awareness observing them. Research published in Frontiers in Psychology demonstrated that more intense ego dissolution experiences correlate with greater long-term reductions in depression and anxiety. Consider that carefully. It is as though the brain receives a complete reset. Carl Jung would have identified this as confrontation with the self, capital S, the larger, wiser dimension of your psyche, obscured by ego's fear-based conditioning. This isn't merely mystical language. Genuine biological transformation occurs here. Research examining long-term meditators and psilocybin therapy reveals increased prefrontal cortex activity, the brain region governing empathy, insight, and emotional regulation. Simultaneously, amygdala activity decreases, the structure processing fear and threat. This means post-ego death. The brain becomes less reactive, more contemplative. You're less trapped in patterns like, I'm insufficient or they'll criticize me, and more attuned to present reality, what exists, not what your mind fabricates. This sounds profoundly transformative, but here is the intimidating question rarely addressed. If you dissolve the ego, what remains? Who are you without the stories, the identity, the accomplishments, the pain you've clutched? Is there danger in excessive self-dissolution? Can you venture too far without returning? This is where Carl Jung's wisdom becomes essential, because he cautioned that dismantling the ego without integration could prove equally dangerous as never confronting it. What does integration actually look like? How do you reconstruct an identity aligned with your authentic self, not your trauma, not your conditioning? That is our next destination. We'll explore how Carl Jung's individuation concept provides the missing connection modern neuroscience is only beginning to map, and how you can cultivate a wiser, more compassionate sense of self after ego death. This section is crucial because transformation without grounding resembles chaos, and if you felt disoriented during spiritual awakening or psychological healing, this might provide clarity. The ego has unraveled, the mask removed. You've glimpsed deeper truth beneath the chaos, and perhaps for the first time, you're uncertain of your true identity. This can be terrifying, not because it is harmful, but because it is unfamiliar, like awakening in your lifelong home, suddenly noticing every wall painted differently and doors relocated. The question becomes, now what? If the ego was never your authentic self, but facilitated survival, how do you re-enter the world after ego death? Not as the former self, but as something more complete, more aligned, more vital. Carl Jung called this journey individuation, and understanding this may distinguish healing from fragmentation. Carl Jung wasn't merely a psychologist. He was a mystic in scientific clothing. He believed the human psyche isn't inherently broken, but layered. Peeling back those layers reveals not emptiness, but meaning he described individuation as becoming your true self, not others' expectations, not the persona pleasing everyone, but the self that is whole shadow and light, conscious and unconscious. All aspects integrated, this journey often begins after ego death, because only then are we compelled to ask, who am I really? That is not rhetorical. It is an invitation to rebuild, not the ego as it was, but as it can become. A healthy bridge between inner and outer worlds, a self-version listening to soul, not merely fear. Neuroscientifically, this rebuilding phase involves neuroplasticity, the brain's capacity to rewire itself through new experiences. After ego death, neural patterns once operating automatically, patterns shaped by trauma, social roles, or outdated beliefs, are disrupted. Within that disruption, new patterns can form supporting this process through mindfulness, therapy, creative practices, or spiritual reflection can literally reshape how your brain processes identity, emotion, and connection. This explains why post-ego death periods often bring heightened intuition, increased empathy, reduced thought identification, meaning seeking, and deeper connection to creativity and the unconscious. But ignoring or suppressing this phase, attempting premature normalcy, can lead to existential confusion, derealization, or spiritual bypassing. That is why Jung emphasized integration's importance. You've seen behind the curtain. You cannot unsee it. But you can construct a new way of being, one incorporating what you've learned, rather than avoiding it. Here is the revelation. Jung believed the self, your deepest essence, desires this wholeness. It is summoning you often through the exact breakdowns you thought were destroying your life. Panic attacks, burnout, creative blocks, identity crises. What if those weren't failures, but invitations? What if your ego didn't die because you were broken, but because you were finally prepared to awaken? How do you integrate this awakening? How do you live after ego death, having recognized old rules don't apply, and new ones aren't yet written? That is our next exploration. We'll examine tools, supported by psychology and neuroscience, that help rewire your nervous system, reconnect with your body, and rebuild a life aligned with your higher self. Because this journey doesn't conclude with ego death. That is merely the beginning. What follows is the genuine adventure. You've confronted the dissolution of everything you believed yourself to be. You've tasted the raw, overwhelming stillness following ego dissolution, but you cannot remain in that void. Integration isn't optional. It is the distinction between awakening and psychological fragmentation. While ego death may feel like an ending, what follows is actually rebirth. But rebirth requires care, intentional practices supporting your nervous system, mind, and soul as they reorganize around a new existence mode. Here are 4 powerful integration tools. Tool 1, somatic grounding, healing through embodiment. Let's clarify this first. Trauma doesn't reside in thoughts. It lives in your nervous system. That is why merely understanding your spiritual awakening or ego death often doesn't provide relief. Your body feels overwhelmed, unsafe, dysregulated. We must provide what it needs. Expression, discharge. This is somatic grounding. Your body is designed to complete stress cycles, but modern culture teaches suppression. Stay still, appear calm, be polite. But in nature, animals shake after trauma. They tremble, stretch, vocalize, they release. We can too. Try intuitive movement or ecstatic dance. Move as if your body is communicating. Shake for 2 to 3 minutes. Literally shake everything loose. breathwork like Wim Hof or box breathing to re-regulate your vagus nerve, trampoline jumping, cold exposure, ice baths or cold showers reset your system, stretching with sound, groan, sigh, hum, release trapped energy, chanting or toning vocal vibrations stimulate your parasympathetic nervous system, walking barefoot in nature, hitting pillows, visiting rage rooms. Yes, that counts too. These work because your nervous system communicates through sensation, not logic. By permitting your body to physically complete stress cycles, you're signaling your brain, we're safe now. Only then can genuine rebuilding begin. Tool 2, shadow work journaling, allowing the unseen to speak. You might be tempted to remain in light now that you've seen through the ego. But authentic growth means confronting what still hides in darkness. That is shadow work. Jung taught that the shadow contains everything you reject or repress. Your jealousy, control issues, shame, desires. But those aspects aren't evil. They're misunderstood. Until you listen, they'll unconsciously control your life. What is this resentment protecting? What makes me uncomfortable in others that I haven't owned in myself? What emotion have I feared feeling this week? If journaling feels difficult, don't force it. Some people are more verbal. Try voice recording your thoughts instead. Simply speak them aloud, like conversing with your inner world. The goal isn't fixing anything, it is witnessing. Because what you can name, you can integrate. What you avoid strengthens in darkness. Tool 3, archetypal awareness, meeting your inner cast. This is powerful and often overlooked. Carl Jung believed your psyche comprises archetypes, universal energies, or patterns appearing in every culture, myth and dream. These aren't merely stories, they're living forces within you. After ego death, these archetypes often emerge more clearly because the ego no longer suppresses them. You might feel the sudden rise of the inner child craving protection or play, the warrior pushing you to reclaim power, the mystic asking you to trust the unknown, the caregiver urging you to soften and serve, the trickster tempting self-sabotage or laughing at absurdity, the sage whispering truths in stillness. Instead of resisting them, dialogue with these inner energies. Ask yourself which archetype is dominant today. What does it need? What truth is it revealing? When you understand you're not one static self but an evolving cast of inner characters, life becomes more spacious and compassion becomes easier. Tool 4, conscious connection, healing through safe human mirrors. After ego death, your inner world is wide open. You're raw, redefined, more perceptive than ever, but also more vulnerable. That is why conscious connection is among the most overlooked yet powerful integration tools. Here is the paradox. Ego death often leads to solitude, but healing doesn't happen in isolation. It happens in relationship. That is because our nervous systems co-regulate. Around safe, attuned, grounded people, our bodies begin mirroring that stability. In neuroscience, this connects to polyvagal theory, especially the ventral vagal state supporting calm connection and social engagement. This means the right relationships can literally help rewire your nervous system after ego death. This isn't about overwhelming anyone with your revelations. It is about choosing intentional spaces where your emerging self can be seen, accepted, and compassionately mirrored back. Here are some practices, open-hearted conversations with someone who understands. Not to fix you, but witness you. Conscious community spaces like support circles, integration groups, spiritual sangers or therapeutic circles, working with a trauma-informed coach, guide or therapist, familiar with awakening. Even just having one person you can text saying, I feel different. Can I share what is happening? Because when your ego dissolves, it can feel like nobody sees you anymore, not even yourself. But being held in loving connection reminds you you're not disappearing, you're emerging, being met by another human while you're still forming. That is medicine. If you've experienced ego death or even glimpses of it, you're not broken. You're in a sacred in-between. And it is acceptable to lack all the answers right now. What matters most is this: you don't have to return to who you were. You get to rebuild with intention, with truth, and with gentleness. These tools aren't just practices. They're lifelines back to your body, your intuition, your authentic self. I want to hear from you. What is one aspect of your ego you've had to release lately, or perhaps you're in it right now, between stories, between identities, between who you were and who you're becoming? This is a space for genuine conversation, no masks required. If you found this video healing or illuminating, subscribe to Fractal Wisdom. This channel exists to support your expansion, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, with tools that meet you where you are. More is coming, and you won't want to miss what is next. You're not alone on this path. We're walking it together.